Imagine spending your entire life searching for something, only to discover it was never outside of you. Imagine praying, believing, following rituals, while the very truth you seek has always been silently waiting within your own awareness. What if everything you were taught about spirituality is only the surface? And what if Jesus was not teaching religion at all, but something far more profound, something that could completely change the way you see yourself, reality, and existence itself? In this video, you will begin to uncover a hidden dimension of Jesus' teachings, one that has been misunderstood, simplified, and in many cases, forgotten. And stay with me until the end, because the last revelation is the most powerful of all, and it may completely transform the way you understand life itself. If this kind of knowledge resonates with you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction helps this message reach those who are ready to hear it. Now, let us begin. There is a reason why the teachings of Jesus have echoed across centuries, yet remain so deeply misunderstood. Most people see Jesus as the founder of a religion, a system, a structure, a path defined by rules, beliefs, and institutions. But what if this perspective is incomplete? What if Jesus was not pointing to an external system, but to an inner transformation? Scholars like Elaine Pagels, who studied the Gnostic Gospels, suggest that early interpretations of Jesus' teachings were far more focused on inner knowledge, what the Greeks called gnosis, direct knowing, not belief, not obedience, but experience. This aligns with what Carl Jung later explored in his work on the psyche. The idea that true transformation comes not from adopting external doctrines, but from confronting and awakening the inner self. Jesus spoke in parables, not to confuse, but to reveal truths that cannot be understood intellectually alone. Those who have ears, let them hear. But hear what exactly? Not words, but awareness. Not commandments, but consciousness. Because hidden beneath the language of religion, there is a deeper message. A message about perception, about identity, about awakening. And here is where everything begins to shift. Because if Jesus was teaching consciousness, then religion, as most people understand it, was never the destination. It was only a doorway, a symbol, a shadow of something much greater. So let me ask you something. If the truth was never outside of you, why were you taught to look for it there? And more importantly, what happens the moment you stop searching and start observing? Because this is where the real teaching begins, and what comes next will challenge everything you think you know. There is something subtle, almost invisible, in the way Jesus spoke. He rarely gave direct answers. Instead, he pointed. He redirected attention, again and again, not outward, but inward. The kingdom of God is within you, not in temples, not in institutions, not in rituals, within. But what does that actually mean? If you pause for a moment and truly reflect, you may begin to sense that this statement is not symbolic, it is literal. Because what Jesus was pointing to is not a place, it is a state of awareness, a dimension of consciousness that exists beyond thought, beyond identity, beyond everything you were taught to believe you are. Philosophers like Meister Eckhart, centuries later, spoke of this same truth, describing a divine spark within the soul, something untouched by the external world, not created, not learned, but remembered. And here is where most people miss the message, because they try to understand it instead of experiencing it. They turn it into theology instead of transformation. They build systems around it instead of dissolving into it. Jesus never said, "Believe in me, and you will find the truth." He said, "Follow me," and this changes everything. Because to follow, it does not mean to worship. It means to embody, to walk the same path of awareness, to see what he saw, to perceive reality the way he perceived it. And what did he perceive? That the self most people identify with is not real, that the roles, the fears, the attachments are constructs of the mind. Carl Jung described this as the persona, the mask we wear to navigate the world. But beneath that mask, There is something deeper, something silent, something aware. And this is where Jesus was pointing, not to a new belief system, but to the collapse of all false identities. This is why his teachings were often unsettling, because they did not reinforce the ego, they challenged it. If anyone wants to follow me, let him deny himself. This was not about rejection, it was about transcendence. Not destroying who you are, but seeing through the illusion of who you think you are. And here comes a question that few people dare to ask. If everything you believe yourself to be is constructed, then who are you without it? Not your name, not your story, not your past, but the one who is aware of all of it. Because the moment you begin to observe instead of identify, something begins to change. A space opens, a silence emerges, and within that silence, something ancient begins to awaken. And what Jesus taught next goes even deeper into this mystery. There is a reason why Jesus spoke so often about seeing. Having eyes, do you not see? At first glance, it sounds like a simple question, but it is not, because he was not talking about physical sight. He was pointing to perception, to the way you interpret reality, moment by moment. Most people believe they are seeing the world as it is, but they are not. They are seeing the world through layers of conditioning, beliefs and fears, memories. What they call reality is, in truth, a projection. This idea is not new. Philosophers like Immanuel Kant argued that we never perceive reality directly, only our interpretation of it. And in modern psychology, this is reinforced by the understanding that the brain does not simply receive reality, it constructs it. But Jesus had already pointed to this long before. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light. This statement has been interpreted in many ways, but beneath its symbolism, there is something precise. When perception is fragmented, divided by fear, judgment, and illusion, reality becomes distorted. But when perception becomes unified, when you see without distortion, something changes, not outside, but within. Because the world you experience is shaped by the state of your consciousness. This is why two people can live the same situation and experience completely different realities. One sees suffering, the other sees growth. One sees chaos, the other sees meaning. So the question is not, what is reality? But, how are you seeing it? And here is where Jesus' teaching becomes radical, because he was not asking people to change the world. He was asking them to awaken their perception, to see clearly, to remove the filters, to dissolve the illusions. This aligns deeply with what the Buddha later taught, that suffering arises not from reality itself, but from the way we perceive and attach to it. Different cultures, different languages, but the same underlying truth. And this leads to something even more unsettling. If your perception creates your experience, then everything you feel, everything you suffer, everything you fear, is being filtered, shaped, interpreted by your own consciousness. So let me ask you something. If you could see without distortion, without fear, without judgment, what would reality look like? And more importantly, who would you be within it? Because the next step in this journey is not about changing what you see, but about realizing who is the one seeing, and that realization that changes everything. At some point, if you follow this path deeply enough, you begin to notice something unsettling. There is a gap, a subtle distance and between you and your thoughts. At first it feels almost imperceptible, a brief moment where you are no longer fully inside the noise of the mind, but observing it, watching it. And this is where everything begins to shift. Because if you can observe a thought, then you are not that thought. If you can notice fear, then you are not that fear. If you can witness your emotions rising and falling, then there is something within you that remains unchanged. Something stable, something aware. This is what many spiritual traditions have pointed to across time. In Eastern philosophy, it is often described as the witness. In the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, it is the pure awareness that exists prior to identity. And in modern psychology, Eckhart Tolle refers to it as presence, the state of being fully aware of the now. But long before these interpretations, Jesus hinted at the same truth. I am not of this world. This was not a statement of separation from reality, but a recognition of a deeper identity. Not the body, not the personality, not the narrative, but the awareness behind all of it. And here lies one of the most misunderstood aspects of his teachings. When Jesus said, I am, he was not only referring to himself as an individual, he was pointing to a universal principle of consciousness, the same I am that exists within you, the same presence that silently observes your thoughts and your experiences, your life unfolding. This is why in moments of stillness, you can feel something beyond words, a sense of being, not doing, not becoming, just being. And yet, most people never stay there long enough to recognize it, because the mind quickly returns, with its stories, its fears, its need to define and control. And so, they lose contact with that deeper awareness, again and again. But what if that awareness is the very key Jesus was pointing to? What if awakening is not about acquiring something new, but about recognizing what has always been there? This idea resonates with the work of Alan Watts, who often spoke about the illusion of the separate self, and how the sense of individuality is more like a role than a fixed identity. A process, not a thing. So let me ask you, if there is a part of you that can observe everything, then who are you and really? The thoughts, or the one who sees them? Because once this question becomes real, not intellectual, but experiential, you begin to step out of the illusion and into something far more profound. And what comes next challenges even the deepest assumptions about who you think you are. There is a moment, subtle, almost silent, where everything you believed about yourself begins to loosen. Not because someone convinced you, not because you adopted a new belief, but because you started to see, truly see. And when that happens, something unexpected occurs. You realize that the self you have been protecting, defending, improving, is not as solid as you thought. It shifts, it reacts, it changes depending on circumstances, people, and time. This is what ancient traditions have always pointed out. The self, as most people understand it, is not a fixed entity. It is a construction, a narrative continuously shaped by memory and perception. David Hume, the philosopher, once argued that the self is nothing more than a bundle of perceptions, constantly changing, never the same. And in modern neuroscience, this idea is echoed again. The sense of identity is not located in one place, but emerges from processes in the brain. But Jesus approached this from a completely different angle. He did not analyze the self. He invited people to see beyond it. Whoever loses his life will find it. At first, this sounds paradoxical, even contradictory, but within this statement, there is a profound insight. Because the life you are asked to lose is not your existence. It is your attachment to the identity you think you are, your story, your labels, your need to control how you are seen and who you must be. And here is where fear arises, because if you are not your identity, then what remains? Silence, presence, awareness. And for many, that feels like emptiness, but it is not. It is space. A space where something deeper can emerge, something not conditioned, not reactive, not bound by the past. This is why spiritual awakening often feels like a loss before it feels like freedom. You lose certainty, you lose control, you lose the illusion of a fixed self. But in that loss, you begin to discover something else, something that was never constructed and therefore cannot be destroyed. And this is where the teaching of Jesus becomes incredibly radical. Because he was not offering comfort to the ego, he was inviting its transcendence, not to make you stronger as a person, but to show you that what you truly are is beyond the person. So let me ask you something. If everything you call yourself can change, then what is it that never changes? What is it that has been present in every moment of your life, watching, experiencing, aware. Because when you begin to notice that, you're no longer just living your life, you are witnessing it. And from that place, a different kind of freedom begins to emerge. And what comes next reveals why this freedom was never meant to be controlled, but lived. There is something paradoxical about freedom. Most people spend their lives trying to control everything, their future, their image, their outcomes, believing that control will bring peace. But if you look closely, it rarely does. Because the more you try to control life, the more tension you create within yourself. And this is exactly where Jesus introduced one of his most misunderstood teachings. Do not worry about tomorrow. At first it sounds like simple advice, almost naive. But it is not. Because this is not about neglect. It is about presence, about releasing the illusion that the mind can secure the future and returning to the only place where life is actually happening. Now, philosophers like Søren Kierkegaard spoke of anxiety as the result of being trapped between past and future, never fully present. And modern psychology confirms this. The mind constantly projects, anticipates, fears what has not yet happened. But Jesus pointed to something radically different. He invited people to step out of psychological time, to experience reality without the constant interference of mental projection. Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They do not toil. This is not about passivity. It is about alignment, a state where action arises naturally, without the weight of fear, without the burden of overthinking. And here is where the deeper layer reveals itself. Because when you are fully present, you are no longer acting from the conditioned self. You are acting from awareness, from clarity, from something that does not need to force or resist. This is what Taoist philosophy calls Wu Wei, effortless action, acting in harmony with the flow of existence rather than against it. Different language, different culture, but the same underlying truth. Jesus was not teaching people to escape life. He was teaching them how to live it without the distortion of fear and control. And yet, this is incredibly difficult for most people, because the mind constantly pulls you away from the present moment, into regrets, into expectations, into imagined scenarios. So let me ask you, how much of your life are you actually living? And how much are you mentally rehearsing? Because the moment you become aware of this, you begin to see the trap. And in seeing it, you are already stepping out of it, even if just for a moment. And that moment is enough to glimpse a different way of being, a way that is not driven by fear, but guided by awareness. And what Jesus revealed next takes this understanding even further, into something that dissolves the boundary between you and everything you perceive. At the deepest level of Jesus' teachings, there is something even more radical, something that goes beyond identity, beyond perception, beyond presence itself. It is the dissolution of separation, because as long as you experience yourself as separate from life, there will always be conflict between you and others, between you and the world, even between you and yourself. But Jesus pointed to something entirely different. I and the Father are one. For centuries, this statement has been interpreted as something exclusive, something that applies only to Him. But what if that is not the case? What if this was not a declaration of superiority, but a revelation of unity, a truth about the nature of consciousness itself? Mystics across traditions have spoken of this same realization. In Sufism, it is described as the union with the divine. In Advaita Vedanta, it is the understanding that the individual self and the absolute reality are not separate. And in the work of philosophers like Baruch Spinoza, God is not an external entity, but the very substance of existence, everything. And if this is true, then the boundary you feel between you and the world is not as solid as it appears, because everything you experience, it appears within your awareness. Every sound, every sensation, every thought, all of it arises within the same field of consciousness. So where exactly is the separation? Is it in reality or in perception? This is what Jesus was pointing to again and again. Not a distant God, but an immediate presence. Not something to be reached, but something to be realized. And yet, the mind resists this, because the idea of separation is deeply ingrained. It defines identity. It creates the sense of me and other. But the moment this illusion begins to dissolve, something extraordinary happens. Fear starts to fade, because there is no longer another to defend against. Comparison loses its power, because there is no one to compete with, and a deep sense of peace begins to emerge. Not because life has changed, but because the way you experience it has. So let me ask you, if there is no true separation, then who are you in relation to everything? Are you a part of reality, or are you the very awareness in which reality appears? Because the next step in this journey is not just about understanding this idea, but about living it, and that changes everything. If this understanding begins to take root, life no longer feels like something happening to you. It begins to feel like something unfolding through you. And this subtle shift changes everything, because when you no longer see yourself as separate, you no longer act from fear, but from clarity, from compassion, from a deeper intelligence that does not come from thought, but from awareness itself. This is why Jesus emphasized love more than any doctrine. Love your neighbor as yourself. At first, it sounds like a moral instruction, a rule to follow. But within this statement, there is a hidden insight. Because it does not say, love your neighbor as someone separate from you. It says, as yourself. And this only makes sense if, at the deepest level, there is no real separation between you and the other. What you do to another, you are, in a sense, doing to yourself, not as a belief, but as a consequence of unity. This is why true compassion cannot be forced. It emerges naturally, when the illusion of separation dissolves. Philosophers like Arthur Schopenhauer recognized this, suggesting that compassion arises when we see ourselves in others, not metaphorically, but fundamentally. And modern neuroscience supports this idea, through the discovery of mirror neurons, showing that at a biological level we are wired to resonate with the experiences of others, different disciplines, different languages, but pointing to the same truth. That connection is not something we create. It is something we uncover. And yet, most people try to love from the ego, from expectation, from need, from fear of loss. And this creates attachment, not love. But when awareness deepens, love becomes something else entirely. It becomes a state of being, not dependent on conditions, not limited to specific people, but flowing, naturally, from presence itself. And this is where Jesus' teaching reaches a level that few truly grasp. Because he was not teaching how to behave, he was revealing what you become and when you awaken. So let me ask you, is your love something you give, or something you are? Because the final step in this journey is not about learning anything new, but about realizing what has always been true. And this final realization is the one that changes everything. There comes a moment when all the seeking begins to fade, not because you found all the answers, but because you realized you were asking the wrong questions. For so long you searched outside, in teachings, in systems, in interpretations created by others, believing that truth was something distant, something to be reached. But what if the final realization is this? There was nowhere to go, nothing to become, nothing to add, only something to remember. Jesus did not come to create followers of a religion. He came to awaken a realization, a direct knowing, that what you are at your core is not separate from truth, is not separate from life, is not separate from what many call God. The kingdom of God is within you, not as a metaphor, but as a revelation. Because what you have been seeking is the very awareness reading these words right now, silent, present, unchanging, and yet so often overlooked. This is why, in the end, all teachings dissolve, all concepts fall away, all identities lose their grip. Because truth is not something you hold, it is something you are. Philosophers like Jiddu Krishnamurti spoke about this with striking clarity, saying that truth is a pathless land. It cannot be organized, taught, or contained within any system. And this echoes what Jesus was pointing to all along, not a structured belief, but a direct experience, not something to follow blindly, but something to awaken within yourself. So let me ask you one final question. If everything you have been searching for is already within you, at what is left to seek and what happens? The moment you stop searching and simply become aware. Because in that moment, without effort, without striving, you may begin to glimpse something profound, a stillness, a presence, a quiet certainty that does not need validation. And from that place, life is no longer a problem to solve, but a mystery to experience, not with fear, but with awareness. Not with resistance, but with clarity. And perhaps what this was the true teaching all along, not religion, not doctrine, but consciousness, alive within you, waiting, not to be found, but to be recognized.